Democracy does not work. Democracy is the favorite system of government in our modern world, and it has turned into one of the fundamental values of Western society.
Canada will always stand tall for democracy, the rule of law, and human rights at home and abroad.
And we meet here in the oldest of all parliaments because we know that democracy and the values it entails will always prevail.
Democracy works, America, but we gotta want it. Not just during an election year, but all the days in between.
Does democracy work as well as advertised? In this small video series, I will show that the two prevailing theories about democracy don't reflect reality, why the idea of democracy is bound to never work properly, and what is the consequence of knowing all of that for governing in general. In short, I'm here to show you how democracy is an inherently flawed system and why we should abandon it altogether.
Everything in this raft will be run in democratic fashion. See that fork in the river? We're gonna vote to see if we take the right fork or the left fork.
The first of the two theories of democracy that I will discuss, and perhaps the most popular one, goes like that. The ordinary citizen carefully builds throughout his lifetime informed opinions about political issues. When election day is about to come, the citizen weighs the different candidatures and picks the one that most represents his wills and desires, logically expecting the chosen representative to carry out their wishes. The reality is that every assumption of this previous theory is wrong. Let's start with the initial one, that the ordinary citizen has informed opinions about political issues. In 1964, the political scientist Philip Converse released an essay entitled The Nature of Belief Systems in Mass Publics. This study demonstrated that the average American did not have much of a political ideology or a structured political belief. For instance, from a data pool of over 1,000 respondents, a little more than one-third couldn't give a meaning to the terms conservatism and liberalism, and another 46% of them showed uncertainty when assigned the meaning of these terms or explained them strictly under the idea of government saving and spending. This wasn't just because people didn't know how to correctly label their own political positions. No, what Converse showed was that as you move to the grassroots, people's political positions just lose internal consistency and organization. For example, while a congressional candidate that supports cutting taxes would also agree in cutting some welfare to compensate for the reduced revenue, a member of the mass public would be much more likely to hold that the government should cut taxes and increase spending, despite those ideas being logically inconsistent. This, Converse argues, is because the general public lacks sufficient understanding to organize their policy positions, and he also argues that this result was to be expected. Remember that because I will come back to it in a future video. Other studies have also shown that the average citizen in general is, as a matter of fact, woefully uninformed about politics. In his 2002 essay, From Denial to Extenuation, the Harvard degree lawyer Robert Luskin explains that, based on survey data, a small percentage of the American public at any given time doesn't know who the president is. A quarter of the public doesn't know who the vice president is, and when compared to blind guessing, the average American is practically unable to place the Democratic and Republican parties correctly on issues regarding liberal and conservative policies. But perhaps the real smoking gun that settles this issue is the analysis that Converse made about the consistency of political beliefs over time. Up until this point in the video, someone could argue, alright, maybe citizens are ignorant about some number of things in politics, and the things they believe are a bit contradictory, but that's just the point they reached after careful consideration of the facts that are important to them. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. Converse verified a very low correlation in the political beliefs of people over just a 2-year time span. Out of 20 people investigated, just 13 of them were still on the same side of a political issue, which is barely above 10, the number you would expect if people were choosing sides at random. The only plausible explanation is that people have uninformed and therefore changeable political beliefs that don't seem to reflect a careful study and analysis of the policy positions that better represents them. Some may think that is just a picture of an old era. Since 1964, the year Converse study was released, was a long time ago. Recent studies, however, show that little has changed. For example, a much more recent study reviewed data from 1972 to 2004 and concluded that among voters there is only, quote, feeble evidence of issue alignment, end quote. In other words, people's beliefs in one political issue barely influences their belief in another. Given that our first assumption, the informed citizen, was just blown out of the water, the two remaining assumptions become a little pointless. If you have no consistent political beliefs, what does it matter that you try to select a candidate to represent you, or that you believe he will carry your initial wishes? For completeness' sake, however, I will show that the two remaining assumptions are also flawed.
Lucy, prepare the secret ballots. Now pass out the ballots. Everybody mark their ballots. Okay, Marcy, tally the ballots. 1 vote we go right. 1 vote we go left. 1 vote we go right. I know my vote. I vote we go left. Good grief, that's a tie vote.
Let's continue to the assumption that people select the candidate that better represents them. This is simply not true. Political scientist Gabriel Lenz has shown in a 2009 study that party preference rather than policy-oriented evaluation is what determines the vote. In other words, people don't choose their candidates based on their beliefs, they choose their beliefs based on their candidates. To give one concrete example from Gabriel's study, in 1997, in Great Britain, there was a general election for members of the House of Commons. One of the items heavily discussed in this election was European integration. The Labour Party was in favor of integration and the Conservative Party was against it. But up until that election, there wasn't reason to believe that these party positions were well known to all the voters. Gabriel Lenz showed that there were basically two types of voters. The ones that knew the positions of their parties regarding European integration before the media started to diffuse it to the public, and the ones that didn't. The voters that already knew about their party's position considered European integration a very big deal, and it was a decisive issue on their vote. For the voters that didn't know about their party positions beforehand, the issue of integration didn't seem to matter very much. However, that was just until they learned more about their party's position from the media. Once they learned it, the issue suddenly became important to them, and much more decisive on their vote. What this analysis shows is that citizens of Great Britain couldn't have been caring less about the issue of European integration. That just started to matter to them when they discovered that it also mattered to their candidates. They chose their belief about European integration based on their choice for candidate, not the other way around. Gabriel has other similar examples like this and has even written a book about it.
What's the matter with you? How can we have a tie vote? Lucy, pass out new ballots. The vote is whether we get off the reef or not. Marcy, tally the vote. 1 vote to get off the reef. 2 votes to get off the reef. 3 votes to get off the reef. 4 votes to get off the reef. Well, at least this was a unanimous vote. I'm glad I'm part of such a democratic system, sir. This all restores my faith in good government. Okay, gals, let's get the raft afloat.
Alright, people are not informed, don't hold consistent beliefs over time, and don't choose candidates based on their beliefs. Our last remaining assumption is that they are voting in the hopes that elected politicians will carry out their wishes. That is also untrue. Or, if that is true, it doesn't seem to matter on their votes. In the book Democracy for Realists, one of my major references for this video, the authors argue that, quote, studies of Congress find that the policy preference of citizens in a given state or district are only modestly predictive of election outcomes, and that Democrats and Republicans routinely take very different stances once they are elected, even when they represent states or districts with very similar political views. End quote. They go ahead to show that the moderately liberal districts elected Republicans 46% of time, and that moderately conservative districts elected Democrats 25% of the time. despite a huge gap in the policy positions of Republicans and Democrats. The authors finally concluded that, quote, clearly, Republican and Democratic members of Congress representing constituents with similar preference behaved in very different ways. Representatives' voting behavior was not strongly constrained by their constituents' views. Elections do not force successful candidates to reflect the policy preference of the median voter. End quote. What all of this shows is that if people are hoping to be represented, they are doing an abysmal job by choosing candidates that will not pursue their interests. However, there is evidence that shows that people might not even expect anything from politicians anymore. For instance, a recent study in my country, Brazil, showed that 79% of the electorate didn't remember who they voted for Congress in the previous election. If you don't even know who you voted for, how much do you actually care that they're doing a good job or that the next person is going to do a good job?
Welcome, Quahog, to the Town Hall mayoral debate between incumbent Adam West and challenger Lois Griffin. We will now open up the floor to questions from a community at large.
Yes, Mrs. Griffin, how do you feel about those computer websites that put a blue square on the home of a sex offender?
Well, the safety of our children is a very important part of my plan for Quahog. I have a 12-point program for the security.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
No, I'm not impressed, not yet.
Mayor West, if re-elected, would you increase the frequency of garbage pickup?
Well, citizen, that's an excellent question, and I thank you for it. I think it's great we live in a town where you can ask questions, because without questions, we just have answers. And an answer without a question is a statement.
Oh, I like him. He looks me in the eye.
I'd like to have a beer with him. I'm voting for him.
The first theory of democracy presented here was based on three different assumptions. People have solid and well-informed opinions about issues in politics. They vote on the person that agrees with these issues, and they expect this person to carry out their wishes. The data I just presented reveals quite the different reality. People are poorly informed and don't hold consistent or long-lasting political beliefs. They choose their beliefs based on their candidate, not the other way around, and they manage some percentage of the time to elect people that don't represent their wishes at the time of the vote. Which is not surprising, given that they also forget who they voted for, making it impossible for them to even check if they got what they wanted from their candidates or not. The theory of democracy initially presented here, when contrasted with reality, is a complete and absolute failure. Based on this data alone, we could already start to seriously question the way our institutions are set up to work. However, perhaps democracies can still be saved. As I mentioned at the beginning, there is another interesting theory about how democracies work, which is the theory of retrospective voting. Maybe this one will fare better, maybe not. Let's find out together in the next video. Stay tuned.